Admiral Fernando Fearless Villa. I gave a sigh of relief on seeing the small notification that the civilian that ignored the evacuation notice was back in our custody and on his way to an evac point. That's one less loose end, I thought to myself as I was jostled out of my trance-like state and back into the battle we had no hope of winning. I looked down at the readout of the functional point defense system still on board. Only about 10% of our defenses were still operational, with that number rapidly diminishing as time went on. "What's the status of the escorts?" I asked, already knowing what answer I was going to get. The failure to communicate and bells and whistles both activated their broken ties protocol with the Roosevelt about a minute from activating theirs. All friendly QE transmitters are down. The sensors took a shaky breath. "Sir, I think it might be time to consider breaking our own ties." I took my own shaky breath before hitting the ship-wide emergency broadcast system. "Attention all hands, this is Admiral Villa speaking. I will be enacting broken ties protocols in 2 minutes. If you aren't in an escape pod when it activates, then you will be remembered by United Terra and her people. All hands abandon ship." With that, the emergency overhead lighting kicked on and flooded the room in blood-red light. I straightened out and turned to the bridge crew. "I don't expect any of you to want to stay when this ship goes critical, so you are all relieved of your duties. Get out of here. Live to fight another day." No one spoke, as the only thing that could be heard was the sound of salvo after salvo hitting the hull of the Strength through Diplomacy, the notifications for the depressurizations overflowing the interface. Finally, one of the weapons officers spoke up. "With all due respect, sir, we've been serving on this bridge since before we made contact with the aliens. We're not going anywhere." I looked around at the collection of individuals around me. They came from all walks of life, some older, some younger. I could see the resolve harden in their eyes as they all squared their shoulders and started making preparations for the self-destruction of the ship. I nodded, secretly grateful that they stuck around. I pulled out the key and put it into the lock. Breathing heavily, I turned the key and typed in 2 minutes into the self-destruct timer. I couldn't help but chuckle to myself at this moment. I had never imagined that in my time as the fleet admiral for one of the most important ships that humanity had ever put together, that I would be the one making the decision to blow it up. Doubt started to creep in as I wondered if this was the best idea at the time, but I was quickly shaken out of it by another salvo hitting the ship. It was probably the most important thing that I could ever do to deny the enemy, or any non-human for that matter, access to Terran systems, and most importantly, the location of the Sol system. It didn't take me long to punch in the necessary time frame for the ship to go critical and let the civilians on board get onto escape pods. With any luck, they would all be at their evac points anyway, so the only question would be the soldiers fighting for this ship. I had no doubt that they would fight to the last man in defense of the civilians not already in escape pods. "Line us up with the biggest target that we can take with us," I said firmly, thinking about the sacrifice of the rabbit's foot earlier in the day. I got confirmation from the navigations officer, who sent the course to the engines. I closed my eyes as I felt the acceleration of the ship. Not a bad way to die. "Sir, we have an incoming transmission," shouted the comms officer, elation in her voice. "It's the fleet!" My eyes shot open and looked at my console. Just like they said, there was a notification from the Sol 1st Defense Fleet. I rubbed my eyes and accepted the communication. On the other end of the line was the admiral for the fleet, with his graying hair and eyes that could pin down a buffalo. "Admiral Chaplin, it's damn good to see you again," I said eagerly. He nodded before looking at what I assumed was the battle map of the region. "It looks like we have our work cut out for us, so let's not wait any longer. Admiral Villa, get the Strength through Diplomacy as far from combat range as you can. We'll take it from here." I nodded and motioned for navigations to make the necessary course corrections. I leaned back in my chair and closed my eyes, but this time for an entirely different reason. Hope bloomed in my chest for the first time in the last 45 minutes. We were going to make it out of this.
High Commander Thaggeth, I directed the fleet to focus on the Strength through Diplomacy now that the sensor suite confirmed that the last of its escorts was dead in the water. It was only a matter of time before those pitiful Terrans finally surrendered. "High Commander, we have new contacts that have just jumped in," shouted my sensor officer. "They seem to be Terran." I froze as I saw the enemy's numbers jump to well over 1,000. All of the known vessels that the Terrans had were all accounted for, either by the Conclave itself or by our allies. So where were these ships coming from? They must have a place larger than the one I'm seeing here. I sent that information back to High Command and focused on the new ships coming in. They haven't gotten any damage, but we still had the numerical advantage, so I had no question about who was going to win this battle.
Admiral Elon Chaplin. All units fire at will and prepare for boarding actions. Protect the strength through diplomacy at all costs. It was only a moment before the carriers disgorged their fighter craft, and the battleships started steaming ahead, almost breaking safety regulations of the Navy. Plasma cannons and kinetic salvos buried themselves into the hulls of the Yalayan crafts before us. As soon as the area directly surrounding the strength through diplomacy was secured, we could send in relief ships to try and get the civilians off of it and the Yalayans out of it. We may have been too late for the rest of the ships in the escort, but at least we got here in time to save them. Thank God for that.
Admiral Fernando Fearless Villa. All units fire at will and prepare for boarding actions. Protect the strength through diplomacy at all costs. I sank into my chair and breathed a sigh of relief. With the fleet finally here, there was no reason for broken ties to be enacted. We weren't going to die today. I switched off the countdown timer and sent a general message to the occupants of the ship. Fortunately, only about 10% of the lifeboats were launched, some already being picked up by various cruisers in the fleet. As I felt the familiar push of momentum before artificial gravity took over again, I scanned the battlefield, looking for a place that we could park the ship until the enemy surrendered or fled the system. After only a moment of looking around, I found a moon that would be the perfect cover for most of the battle. I sent the course suggestion to the navigation officer and closed my eyes. Our part to play in all of this is over.
High Commander Thagath. I watched in horror as the fresh Terran ships started engaging with the fleet, their single fighters swarming the battlefield, proving to be almost impossible for our autocannons to track and destroy, along with the battleships that rivaled our own in size and strength. They fought with a ferocity that I couldn't help but admire. All the while I saw our target, the strength through diplomacy, limp its way behind one of the moons in the battlefield. If our people fought half as hard as these Terrans are, we would have taken this galaxy centuries ago, I muttered out loud as I saw with fascination the patterns that the Terran fighters flew in, reminding me of the blood locusts of what was left of the wild places Talsk, our homeworld. I informed High Command of the developments of the battle and tried to direct my fleet to the places where they could do the most damage. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw a ping come back from High Command. The message reading, "This venture is no longer tactically sound. Retreat to Talsk for potential counterattack." If I was capable of blinking, I would have. Was High Command worried about the Terrans attacking our home system? There was no way that the Terrans had any more military power left to attack with. I've been wrong before. The thought sent a shiver down my spine as I realized the implications of what I was thinking. We had our entire fleet here, ancestors above. We only left enough to defend Talsk from a fleet like the one that we were initially facing. Who's to say that these Terrans didn't have another fleet tucked away somewhere else in uncharted space? With that revelation, I sent the retreat order. My officers seemed shocked by that announcement, but complied with my orders regardless. The only ones that didn't follow with the retreat order were the ships that were fighting off borders, and even then, they were spooling up their engines to make a hasty retreat. It was only 30 seconds later that my navigations officer finally gave me the nod that we were ready for the jump. I gave her the signal for us to go, and with a flash of light, we exited the battle with home in our sights.
Admiral Elon Chaplin. That's right, fucking bastards! Run while you still can! We'll see you real soon, I muttered under my breath as I saw the number of ships fleeing the battlefield. The only ones that seemed to stay were the ones being actively boarded, perhaps as a way for their hijacked ships to not be used as a Trojan horse into their territory. I would have approved, if it weren't for the orders and directions that I had been given years before we had officially contacted the aliens of the galaxy. Satisfied that the battle was over, I gave Admiral Villa another hail. He picked up the call almost immediately, his haggard appearance causing me to wince slightly. Admiral Villa, the battle is as good as won. Prepare for boarding and repairs to be made. He nodded, clearly exhausted by the ordeal of the last 45 minutes. Thanks again for the help, and we could really use the repairs. Then it's a damn good thing that we brought what we did. I pointed to the sensor officer. Get me a scan of this sector of space, see if there are any asteroids that would be good for mining. The officer gave a brief nod and typed a few things into his console. After a few moments, his features went from alert to concerned. Sir, we have an asteroid belt that is suitable for mining, but we also have what looks to be a GC commercial vessel making its way to us. His eyes squinted as he studied the screen more carefully. There seems to be some damage to her engines. I narrowed my eyes. What the hell is a GC vessel doing all the way out here? Hail that vessel, find out what the hell is going on here. It only took a moment before the channel was open and I was looking at an Orsier. I had always wondered why all of the aliens looked like some fauna from Earth, but I left that kind of thinking to the scientists. This is Admiral Elin Chaplin of the Fuck Around and Find Out. Identify yourself or prepare to be fired upon. There were a few moments of silence until the Orsier made motions to begin speaking, when they were cut off by a voice that required no translation. Alex. This is Admiral Elin Chaplin of the Fuck Around and Find Out. Identify yourself or prepare to be fired on. His grim visage was on view for the entire bridge to see. Under normal circumstances, I would have been relieved to see another Terran, but this face just filled me with dread. The words rang loud and clear through the speakers on the bridge. The fact that United Terra had sent the first Sol defense fleet out here was enough to get me into stunned silence. The captain looked stunned that they would even bother trying to reach out to us just to threaten us, not knowing that this was just the Terran way of doing things. I didn't know if she was going to respond, the seconds ticking away until I finally blurted out. This is the Galactic Community Commercial Vessel, the Shooting Star. We have severe damage to our engines and cannot jump. The entire bridge looked over to me, shocked that I would even dare answer the question for the captain. I gave a small shrug as the Admiral's face turned from stern to shocked, only for it to go back a second later. Whoever was just speaking English just now, identify yourself and tell us what the hell you're doing on that ship. I looked over to Ava and gave her a look. She gave a heavy sigh and held out her hand. I quickly climbed into her hand, and she strode into the view of the camera. Confusion once again reigned on the Admiral's face. And who the fuck are you supposed to be?